the lowest point was I was sitting in, I can almost feel the walls around me now. I ended up in a jail cell at Hammersmith Police Station, charged with quite a serious offence. And it was there, I can almost remember thinking that I'd thought everything was a game until then. And all of a sudden, as my whole world came crashing down around me, everything all of a sudden got very, very real.
Welcome to the To Be Human podcast, Joe.
Hi, how are we doing?
I'm very well, thank you. It's exciting to have you, Joe. So, Joe, I was listening to a podcast that you were on with Australian Geographic, and you said you were talking about the pressures of having a famous dad and an unconventional upbringing. So I would love to know more about the younger version of Joe who was feeling those pressures of having a famous dad and an unconventional upbringing.
Okay. So it depends on how far back you want to go. So I think from my mid-teens, I actually started feeling it as pressure. But with all these things, it's the way we react to things is never, or not necessarily, just one instant. It's a build of things. And so over the whole of my childhood, there's times when I can't associate feelings to, but I can remember visually. I can remember visually seeing the reaction when my mum had received a telegram saying that somebody had been killed. I can remember other expeditions, going to the airport and people clinging onto each other, husbands and wives clinging onto each other emotionally and crying and sobbing because, again, somebody else had been killed. I can remember feeling the fear as well as excitement of the preparation for Dad going on expeditions. So all of that was in my much younger years, let's say pre-teens. The pressure came, and when it started to manifest itself, like for so many of us, actually happened in my teens when we start to change, we start adding, our perceptions start to change, and we start to create values, our own values around the world and what things mean and what things have meant to us. So I think the groundwork had been set, but it wasn't until the teens that things started to manifest themselves. And yeah, I could have gone one of a couple of ways, and I just started to become a very troublesome teenager. Sorry. And I started getting myself into a lot of trouble. I was, I'm not sure if I was attention seeking or just trying to make my own mark on the world. I was definitely a mixed up kid. And definitely struggling. I mean, I look back and, we think that, people who get into trouble and people who end up involved in drugs, drink, crime, etc., come from broken homes and all of that. And ours was a very unorthodox home, but I had parents who loved each other wholly. They were passionately in love with each other, and they were married for 50 years until my mum's death, and they were both very, very loving. They were both very, very caring. They both encouraged me and my brother in all that we did. No, not in all that we did, in all the good things that we did. And yet both me and my brother, we both went off the rails. Yeah.
So because I'm really curious, because, your father is very well respected when it comes to being, in expeditions. And as a child, as you're sort of sharing, it is very confusing because these are high risk situations that people are going into, and death is a very real thing. What was the experience like for you when you were younger and, having a father that would go away for long amounts of time? Were you ever questioning whether he would come home?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. So we... and this was, you remember, this is back in the day. So I'm 54 now. I was when he was already a very well established mountaineer, and being received as a guest at Buckingham Palace and all this kind of stuff through the 50s and the 60s. And then his real big ones that made his mark on the world, as opposed to just the UK climbing scene, were happening in both his north face of the Eiger in the 60s, but then his conquering of the south face of Annapurna in 1970, when I would have been about 3, and then his Everest expeditions, which were the southwest face, which hadn't at that time been climbed, in 72 and then 75. And it's the 75 that they finally got to do it, so by that time I was about 8. And I have a lot of memories around that. And I can remember, the first time I can actually remember about that this was dangerous was actually in 72. So I'd have only been about 5, but I just have vague memory of that something really bad had happened. And my dad's long-term friend, Ian Clough, had been killed. Was that? Yeah, in 72. So, and then by 75, when they succeeded in climbing Everest. Now, before that, I'd started to make my own relationships as a small person with these climbers, with these big, hairy, bearded, craggy looking people who were all really exciting. And one of them who, and I remember some more than others, particularly I remember the ones who actually paid us attention. And one of those was a guy called Mick Burke. And he was a really, really engaging character. And I can remember that even though I was only 8. And I'd just built this relationship with him and can remember him distinctly. I can even remember he was a really hairy butt, and I can actually remember how seeing his stubbly face and just thinking. I can remember, how you get snapshots of things when you're kids. That I can remember just him having this really craggy, stubble-covered face. I can almost remember the texture of it. And he used to throw us around and play fight with us and all that when he came up. And then he never came back. And that was the first time that I got really, really upset. And it was from there that I really started to realize, well, hold on. When Dad goes, there's a chance that he's not coming back. And in my eyes, things seem to have accelerated. He started going on a lot more. That big Everest expedition had been a huge thing and taken up a lot of time. But then after that, he started doing, there was a lot more expeditions. There was a whole succession of expeditions over the next few years. And we were still small. And I can almost remember thinking that, it's almost better if somebody else, and this is the kind of the twisted mind, as you're trying to associate and disassociate things, that if somebody else's dad died, my dad would have to come home. And that's the kind of process that an 8-9-year-old mind is going through. And all these kids, because there was a whole load of us kids who used to play with each other, who were all the sons and daughters of climbers. And these were my friends' parents, that you're kind of thinking in the back of the one, I want my dad to come back. Does that mean that your dad can't?
That's incredibly deep, Joe.
Yeah, I know.
Beautiful reflection. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really curious because, I feel like with children, when they have, quote unquote, famous parents or parents that have achieved a lot in their life, it tends to almost go two ways. The child becomes, very invested in becoming like them, or very invested in going the other way. What do you think happened with you and your brother in terms of, obviously, as you've shared earlier, sort of going more down the route of, getting into trouble and sort of getting into more of the, drugs and alcohol and that sort of direction?
I don't know. I don't know if it's a character thing or if it's potluck or what it is. It's, you've got, say, me on this side, and then I look at people like Peter Hillary. So Peter Hillary, he went the opposite way with his dad. Maybe it's a generational thing as well. Peter Hillary's slightly older than me, and kind of falls in a generation in between. But yeah, I don't know. It could have been a whole number of things. Even Dad was ridiculously famous at the time for a mountaineer. He's probably one of the first mountaineers, or if he actually no, he was the first mountaineer to kind of have that kind of daily recognition. And he was doing adverts on the telly for Bovril. And so, unfortunately, this is at that time when I was 12, 13. And so I just got destroyed at school. I was called Bovril Boy, but I wasn't just called Bovril Boy by the kids. I was called Bovril Boy by the teachers, And so I just wanted to be anybody else except for Chris Bonington's son. So I then, to a point, I wouldn't tell people what my surname was.
Wow.
I went for a hell of a long time where it was just, it was just me. I didn't want to be. So I started running in the other direction. So I think that was partly nurtured by the environment I was in, and not necessarily by mum and dad. I think that side have been a catalyst. But yeah, if I'd have maybe been in a different, more nurturing external environment to the family, could have been like Peter Hillary or whatever, and you know, wanting to follow in my father's footsteps, etc. And yeah, so but I didn't, and I wanted to get as far away from that as possible, and I didn't have at the time I didn't have the tools to cope. I was just dissatisfied. I hadn't discovered myself. I hadn't discovered what it was that I did want. I just know that I didn't want what Dad, even though I loved him very much, I just didn't want what Dad had to offer, which is such a shame. It must have been so hurtful for Dad because, you know, up until that point, I used to go climbing with him all the time. You know, and we used to go and do things together, and I spent the time romping over the hills and all this. And then all of a sudden, as a sulky teenager, I just went in the opposite direction as far away as I could.
And when you were sort of in the space of, you know, taking drugs, drinking alcohol, getting in trouble with the law, what did you learn about yourself through that experience?
That I'm a leader. I could
whatever you do,
I could lead people down the wrong path. That
means you could lead them down the right as well, huh?
Exactly. No, you know, if we just shoot forward, you know, to 20, 30 years, so from to the person I've become, which is all about helping people to get more out of life, you know, as I call it, tearing chunks out of life, about utilizing adventure and physical challenge and mental challenge and personal growth as a way of developing themselves, and leading people. You know, I've been a trek leader. I lead groups. I lead people through process, etc. Back as a teenager, I was leading them down to behind the bike sheds to get into trouble for doing something. It's funny, experience there's that saying, experience maketh the man. And the experiences I did have then, some of them I do look back and you can't help but cringe. And I wouldn't be who I am today and be able to approach people with the knowledge and insights at times that I have if I hadn't had to go down through those paths, if I hadn't been so lost. And I was really, really lost.
Because what I'm really curious about, Joe, you know, is part of why I started this podcast was to get high performers on and really understand their story in their entirety. And as humans, we've all faced adversity. And what I'm really passionate about is understanding how people overcome adversity. And I know, you know, why I linger sort of in this area of your life is that, to my awareness, you had a point that was almost the breakdown to break through. What can you sort of share that experience with us and sort of along the journey of what came out of that experience, which has obviously led you on this path now, that what you're still doing at the moment?
So my path was a kind of a descent. So I started getting into trouble at school. Dad was away a lot. You know, in those days, travel was a lot. Everything took a lot longer. So Dad's trips were big, long trips. He could be away for 3 months on one trip. And then he'd be away all the autumn season in the UK, which is the lecture season, when all the various people would be driving around and giving lectures around the country. So my poor old mum ended up just being this voice on the other end of the phone, crying voice, because she'd been run by the school again, because, you know, I'd got into a fight with somebody, I'd stolen something, or I'd come home on weekends, and whilst I was at home, I'd steal loads of alcohol out of the mum and dad's drink cabinet, mix it all up in jam jars and take it back to school and get myself and somebody else drunk or whatever. But then after that, when I left, so I got into I did some pretty stupid things that got me into trouble with the police at the school, and the police got called into school, and so I got expelled at the age of 16, and that was the end of my school career. My mum and dad were determined that this carry on, so that the one thing that I enjoyed doing and loved doing was cooking. So I ended up going to cater to TEC, which is the equivalent to the Australian TAFE, and doing a diploma in hotel management. And again there, so I was 16, and things were very lax in the UK at the time. You know, it wasn't as strict around drinking and stuff like that. There, you could go to, you'd go to your pub with your dad at the age of 16, and the barman would serve you. And I threw myself headlong into college life, and discovered, I just didn't have an off button. And so I started enjoying the extracurricular activities more and more, and then ended up flunking out of college, and ended up down in London, and down there it was just a slippery slope. I was just getting involved more and more with drugs and with petty crime. And the lowest point was I was sitting in, I can almost feel the walls around me now. I ended up in a jail cell at Hammersmith Police Station, charged with quite a serious offence. And it was there, I can almost remember thinking that I'd thought everything was a game until then. And all of a sudden, as my whole world came crashing down around me, everything all of a sudden got very, very real. Because whilst I'd been living in London for a while, mum and dad didn't get to see what I was up to on a daily basis. They didn't get to see all of it. It was hidden from their eyes. And they knew, and I, after talking to them later on in later years, they knew what was going on. But, as my mum, it was a firm believer of somebody can't help. You can't help somebody until they want to help themselves. So they kind of kept some of that at arm's length and just tried to help me where they could. I was just so lost and so in deep. And I ended up getting charged and ended up in Crown Court. And then, of course, the newspapers caught hold of it and worked out who I was. And the next thing, there was reporters accosting my poor grandmother in Keswick, and people following my mum and dad down the street with cameras. The whole paparazzi thing, it was just insane. And it was then that, for the first time, that I actually really saw what my, what's the word I'm looking for? What the impact of the implications of what I was doing, or what I had done, and how that was affecting all those around me. So luckily I was found not guilty, because I was looking at a custodial sentence. I think that would have been a custodial sentence. If I'd have had that. I've made a lot of stupid mistakes, but I wasn't a bad person. And I think a custodial sentence, I probably wouldn't be sitting talking to you here now. As it was, I managed to, I was found not guilty, managed to avoid the prison system. And it was from there that I had a long climb back out from where I was. And I'm not going to say it was, you know, turned around, moment of enlightenment and an epiphany, the clouds opened and a ray of sunshine came down and shone itself on me, you know, thou art saved. I did have some mishaps over the next few years and all of that, but I was on the right path again. The thing that ignited what was to become a lifelong passion was they sent me, there was a guy, a personal development guru, American guy at the time, who's now passed on, called Lou Tice, who used to run a program called the Pacific Institute that I believe at one time was quite big in Australia as well. And they sent me on a junior version of that. So it was specifically aimed at kids, but it was all very Tony Robbins-ish, but it was aimed at teens. I went on that and I absolutely loved it. And then I think it was my mum instigated this. She persuaded Dad that me and Dad should actually do the adult one together. And that was absolutely phenomenal. So that was the start of the road back, basically. I started finding, you know, passions that I was into outside of the life I'd had before. And I was very into my music and all that. So I spent a number of years in the music industry. I enjoyed the music industry, but it wasn't, there were too many, the music industry is still the music industry, and there's still too many influences around that weren't good for me. So eventually I got out of that. I didn't like who I was becoming. And by that time I'd met my Australian wife, and we moved over here. By that time I just wanted to do something real. I mean, it had been great being in the music industry, and it was a fun time in my 20s. And again, it was just more exploring relationships and what I could do. And I worked as a record label manager. I used to, and a P&D manager, which means that I had to coordinate the relationship between the PR and the release and the artists and all that kind of stuff. And so that was actually really good and great skills that I've carried through into all other aspects of what I do now. But it's very, very shallow industry. And so I by the time I came over here, I just wanted to go and build a school with my bare hands in Somalia or something. I just wanted to do something real, and I wanted to give back. I thought it was time I actually did something for other people, something beyond the end of my nose. So I was 30 by this time. And so then I started actually getting myself fit again as well, and getting myself fit, and really enjoyed that process. And I then also got into some ultra running and did one of the very first Oxfam Trail Walkers as a running team. I loved the process, and I thought, okay, yeah, look, there's something I could do here. And I actually, when I came over, so I'd said I'd wanted to give something back, and I couldn't think what to do. So as we traveled over here, when I got here, I got a job in an outdoor store with Paddy Palin, and I've been raised in the country, and even before all the drugs and all that, I've always had this this love of nature and of the external world and the environment around me, and its relation with each other. So I took myself off to TAFE, and here am I in this other country where all the plants look so different. You know, back home, I knew all the meadow plants. I knew all the wildlife that you could find in the hedgerows. I knew the birds, etc. And I got to this place where all of this was alien to me. So I thought, okay, well, look, I took myself off and I took a Cert 4 in bush regen and started doing conservation work. And I thought, okay, well, look, whilst I'm out there pulling weeds and learning about this environment I'm in, it's a perfect environment for me to work out what to do next. And then it was then that, you know, whilst that was going on, that I was getting myself really fit again. I now had an opportunity to go on another trip. Dad had asked if I wanted to go and do an unclimbed peak, which I jumped at the chance. And so, so from there, I'd got this chance to do this unclimbed peak. I had these ideas formulating because I'd enjoyed this journey back to fitness and to health and to well-being. And I'd already decided to become a personal trainer, or the idea was there. And then in 2000, we went and climbed this unclimbed peak in the Kanchenjunga region called Danga 2. And it was whilst I was there, the Kanchenjunga region had only just been opened up. And the whole time we were there, it just shows you the difference to more recent years in Nepal. We were outside of Kathmandu on the expedition for about 4 or 5 weeks. And we only saw about 5 other Western parties in that whole time. And of 1 or 2 of those, as we passed people and were walking, there was people there who should have been looking at the mountains around them, but they were so buggered. They were just heads down, looking at their feet and looking not very well at all. And I thought, I think there's an opportunity here. And so when I came back to Sydney, 2000, I then qualified as a PT. But then quickly realised that with the way that the adventure travel industry wasn't as mature as it has been in recent years, I was going to starve to death. So I started, you know, training stressed out executives and overweight mums and all this at my local Fitness First. But all in the meantime, I always had my eye on this other side, which was training people for. Originally, I set up a thing called Trek Fit, and training people for treks, and so I then started getting a couple of people to do that, and then I got more people for places like Kili and for Everest Basecamp and that, and then I got a call from one of the directors at Fitness First, who I didn't know even knew my name, and said, "Oh, we've got somebody we'd like you to talk to. He'd like to. He wants to climb Everest. We think you'd be the best person to do it." And so I met a guy called Steve Bock, and I ended up training what was then Australia's most successful Everest expedition. They put five Australians on the summit. There was 8 people in the expedition. There was five Australians and 3 South Africans. And I trained all Australians, and they all made it. And somebody else trained all the Saffers, and unfortunately they didn't. They were okay. They just didn't get to the top. But yeah. So and that's yeah, and then from there, I really wanted to. I knew that this was definitely my space. I know, and I absolutely love what I do. Like I love with an absolute passion. I love everything about it. I love exploring it. I love the amount, the fact that there is, it's not a finite sports science, etc. It's not a finite subject. You can't say, okay, we know all there is to know. We're constantly finding out more, and that appeals to me. You know, as we talked before the interview, we had that quick chat about, you know, I like yourself, I'm a complete course junkie. I'm an education junkie. I love learning. And there is so much to learn. So, yeah, so I've been doing that ever since, and now it's over 20 years, you know, and I've been really lucky. I've worked with some amazing people, and we've had people doing some amazing things all around the world.
And you've obviously had clients from all walks of life. What is it that you've really learned about people through working with them over the last 20 years?
Well, I love this question. So it's really, really interesting, but people are so different, and a lot of people in my industry, they just want to work with the best. They want to work with the committed athletes, and that's their ideal. And look, don't get me wrong, working with people like that is great. There is something really satisfying about having somebody, because those people don't question you. They want to know what will get them a result, and you tell them to do it, and they'll just bloody do it, and they will keep on doing it until it doesn't get a result. Okay,
right.
And they're utterly committed, but they are an infinitesimal proportion of the people that we train as publicly focused coaches and strength and conditioning coaches. You know, I'm a qualified strength and conditioning coach, as well as a personal trainer, but I don't work for a team. I don't work for people who are being paid, and my sole income comes from working with these type of people, you know. But the amazing thing is I've got all these people. So say you've got 100 people, and 10% of them are these absolutely committed, you know, adventure-seeking, high-achieving automatons, and they're not automatons; they're awesome people. But it's the rest of them who both drive me absolutely nuts, but are also the most interesting, because it's when you see somebody who you know what they need to do, and they know what they need to do, but and they want the same result as automaton over here, but they can't. You can tell the person will do it, and they'll do it, and then Joe Public will say, yeah, I want to do that, but you've got to make it interesting. It's got to be fun, you know. Whereas the other person, they don't care whether they just, does this get me results? Okay, I'll do it. Okay. Whereas the other one say, yeah, I really, really want results. Yeah, can you make it fun as well, please? And can I also do my CrossFit class on a Tuesday? I'm doing Zumba on a Wednesday, and I'd like to do this. Oh, and by the way, I'm not giving up alcohol. You know, and it's really funny. I love trying to navigate that. Sometimes it drives me nuts. Sometimes, as my clients will tell you, sometimes for the language, I'll lose my shit at them if they just haven't done whatever it is for the umpteenth time and are still expecting a different result. But it's great. It's those people. It's some of the people. I won't mention her name, but there's one client in particular who was so scared of everything. She had such low self-esteem, and she's traveled with me, been on treks that I've led, etc. But you know, for her doing her first pull-up, or being able to get her head around jumping onto a box, was as important as somebody crossing a country for the first time. You know, as far as
so beautiful.
The difference there, you know, what I'm about is it's about helping people get the most that they can out of life.
I absolutely love that, Joe, and I couldn't agree more. You know, I think sometimes we can focus on, you know, this summiting Everest is the most important thing, but I think it is just important as someone that, you know, may feel a little fearful in life, and it's about taking that first step or that first jump or that first pull up that is really what it's all about.
Yeah, and then, because then after, if you've gained somebody's trust to do, and this is my whole ethos around things, if you've gained their trust for them to be able to do that, and you can see they've trusted you to learn the process and do the process to do that, well, then maybe I can take that person and persuade them to leave the gym and come with me for a trail run. Okay. Then they do the trail run and they survive that. And it's, okay, well, look, why don't you come with me? We're going to do an overnight bushwalk. And they do that. And it's, okay, I reckon you could do a multi-day walk. And they could do that. And now by now as well, this, whoever it is, it might be a town, you know, complete townie who's never even thought about the bush or the environment. You're now exposing them to some of Australia's beautiful wilderness, and they're seeing, I get amazed when I see people, and even my wife, you know, who, you know, she was born, raised here, and yet I've seen so much more of Australia's wildlife than she has, you know. And it's, once we get, if I can get people out and that they can see a yellow-tailed black cockatoo, if they can see that, look, there's a red-bellied black snake, if you leave it alone, it's fine. That, you know, oh, here's the scats of a fox. You know, it's a shame that that's there, and this is the impact that it's having. You know, look at this beautiful bush. Oh, and look, here you can actually see, because of the runoff from the plateau, that we've got some lantana and some weed sources coming in down into the bottom of the valley, and this will be the effect that this has on this place eventually. You know, and so you can start teaching people and educating people that. And then from there, I can then maybe persuade them, if they've done that and they enjoyed that, well, hey, let's go to another country. Why don't we go to the Dolpo region of Nepal, or just a bucket list place? Let's go and do Everest Basecamp or something like that. And then all of a sudden you've got this person who's never been on a trip to a third world country, or if they have, it was you know, somewhere like Bali and they were in a resort, that they're now going out and they're interacting with another culture, with people with different beliefs, with different spirituality, and they're immersed in it, and they're all traveling together towards one goal, and it's been a whole journey. And if we can do that with people, and you can then see their face when they get to wherever it is that we're going to, and you can see on their face that you have not just changed their sense of achievement and their self-esteem in themselves, but you've actually changed how they view the world and how they view their fellow man. And that is really worth it, because they haven't just explored and been exploring this time. Whilst they've been doing that, inertly they're exploring themselves as well.
And do you think that's what pulls people to Joe's Basecamp, is that idea of self-exploration?
I think, yeah, this, again, really interesting question. These are great questions. I think people, if you were to ask, like if I was to run a marketing campaign, I don't think you'd go in with the self-exploration. I think that's the bonus, because people don't know what they don't know. Right. People don't know that they need self-exploration. And if they don't know it, they don't care. Mm-hmm. it's only afterwards. And it's funny, I've had quite a few of these talks and with friends and people who've literally, and people who came to Joe's Basecamp, not because it's the place for adventurers, but they were just referrals from friends of friends. You know, you've got to go there. Joe's really good, or you know, it's just a bit different, or you know, whatever. And they've got there, and they've come there because they are traditional. You know, they're an accountant and they're 40 and they're, you know, they're drinking a bit too much at the weekends and all this, and they're not losing weight. And once they immersed in the culture and we're doing the other stuff, and we start challenging them in these other areas, they actually start looking inwards on themselves then. And I think that's the bonus, and it's not necessarily at the moment or in the gym environment something that you could market to and get the gym to survive on. Online's different. I mean, online, because then you can actually seek out, you know, the 7 billion people on the planet or whatever. I can actually market to, okay, you know, are you adventurous and looking for personal development, you know, and then, you know, if you spend enough Facebook advert dollars, eventually you're going to find them, you know.
So what is Joe's Basecamp in present day? Because, you know, I'm an avid follower of your business, Joe, and I know during COVID times things are sort of changing and evolving. What's the update with where you're at the moment?
Yeah, so I won't lie, we've had a really, really tough couple of years. The whole of the fitness industry has been struggling. I think we've been hit especially hard because we're about adventure. Our focus is around adventure and events. So we're about helping people find goals and then train for those goals. All of our events have been cancelled and all the borders are still closed. So even when we opened up again, people still weren't training for those things because the events were still cancelled, borders are still closed. And we basically the last 2 years has basically been death by 1,000 cuts. It really has. And it's funny, me and my general manager, Megan, had all these great plans. We've got awesome connections and networks, you know, like I work a lot with the Australian Himalayan Foundation. We work a lot with the North Face, with Australian Geographic, etc. And we had all these amazing plans and these things that we were going to do with them, that we sat down, we did an offsite end of 2019 of all this fantastic stuff we're going to do. And then come January 2020, the world changed. And unfortunately we couldn't recover. So the last lockdown was, it had been slowly, our membership base had slowly been declining over those 2 years. And then the last lockdown, I made a decision that Joe's Basecamp isn't going to reopen. But it's a good thing, so not a bad thing. It was very, very sad to do. It was ripping the Band-Aid off was the hardest bit. It was very emotional. More than a few tears were shed by all involved. Making the decision was the hardest part. That was really tough. Realizing, looking at the numbers and thinking, we just can't come back from this. Then telling the staff and telling the members, that was really tough. That was hard. But then after that, it's just been about getting things done, the tasks that are involved. Learned a lot. I never knew closing down a business was so involved and also so expensive as well. I hadn't counted on that.
That doesn't make sense.
No. But one of the things that one of the many great things that's come out of this is a couple of years ago. So I'd always had this idea that Joe's Basecamp, I wanted to build this mecca for outdoor adventure training. But at the end of the day, the northern beaches of Sydney, this isn't Queenstown. It's not Chamonix in France. It's not Jackson Hole in Wyoming. It's not it's not the place that you think of for adventurers to congregate, etc. And I'd always thought that, look, if I can just build it that as long as it pays for itself, I had this idea that I wanted somewhere that was real, that we could practice on real people, and we'd have a hub for people to go to. I'll be honest, I think that was a bit of a nice to have, because I'd always known that my future was online, where I had people, and I was already writing programs for people who were out of area, interstate, international. But then the last 2 years, I thought, okay, with the first lockdown, I said, okay, well, let's really drive this. And I've got a very good friend of mine who's actually in the marketing game, a guy called Howard Tinker, who's he does marketing for restaurants and all that. And he said to me, he said, Joe, it's very hard for a jockey to ride two horses in the same race. And that was really, really true, because we're not a big business. I don't have tons of resources. Both us in the office at Joe's Basecamp were both chiefs, cooks and bottle washers. You know, we had to do everything. And when the business was starting to fail because of COVID, we kept on getting pulled back into, I was trying to focus on getting this online model right, but I kept on getting pulled back into, we've got to do another marketing campaign to get members in. We've got to do this. We've got to, you know, and that was just something that needed to be done. It had to be done, but it was taking me away from, in actual fact, where our future, where the real money, and this isn't just about money, by the way. It's just the things that allow me to do the things I want to do to help the people I want to help and that the closing down of the gym really made me realize that. But when I was making that decision, I was thinking, okay, there's all this stuff that I haven't been able to do that's been on my to-do list for years, some big projects that this is stopping me from, because I'm always getting pulled back into this. And so now, you know, here I am, we've just handed back the keys and had to do what they call a make good, this is one of the things that I didn't know about when closing down a business, which is where, because we actually had to break the lease. So I was up for possibly $300,000, but wow. Luckily somebody, an owner occupier, bought the building. And so that got me off the hook, which is absolutely fantastic. And it was, you can't believe the weight off my back that was. But now here I am halfway through September, and I've been decompressing. I haven't rushed into things, and I'm just, I've got an opportunity to do something here really well. I've got the opportunity to do things properly. So I'm just taking my time and getting back into it. But the immediate relief I'm feeling already from not having, I mean, our gym was huge. You know, it was 800 square meters. It was a big place, and it was state of the art. It had a climbing wall, an altitude chamber, all of this. But that comes with a huge rent. And then also, Joe's Basecamp had grown to this thing. All of a sudden, I went from being the Joe show to having 10 staff, and and even though my members absolutely love what I do and are very engaged and great with those relationships, I don't know if I'm a great manager. And the whole staff thing, staff's so hard, managing staff. Oh. So anyway, so now here I am in the sunroom of my house at home, talking to you, with no lease, with no payroll costs, and easing myself back into the online world and feeling really, really, really good. It had been sad closing down Joe's Basecamp and sad admitting to myself, okay, yeah, this wasn't the right model, but yeah, in a good place.
Yeah, I totally understand. And, it is the way in which our future is leading us is online. And I can totally empathize with you because, I work online myself, and there is that aspect of human connection that I really miss. And, obviously post-COVID, I'll be seeking that in other ways. But I totally get the idea of, going into a space of, collective like-minded individuals, and there's something so beautiful about that. And, I have no doubt that you'll still be able to create that in your own way moving forward. You have such a beautiful community, Joe. And
I know, and that's one side. And training online is not for everybody. There's some people who just don't want to do it. And that's fair enough, and I'm okay with that. The community itself, once this is over, because we can still have meetups. There's great organisations like Meetup that we can organise things like that and actually have that community to still meet up. So because that's what Joe's Basecamp really, really was about, the people who had gone in there and who were part of it. We had trekkers, mountaineers, polar travelers, ocean kayakers, ultramarathon and trail runners, just all people who just wanted to do a combination of explore the world around them, explore their own physical limits, explore their own mental limits, and do it in an outdoor and wilderness setting. And I just want to spend my time around people like that.
I am with you there, Joe.
No, it just makes for a lot better conversations.
It does. And I'm really curious, Joe, because obviously you've worked with, some of the best adventurers and athletes in terms of sort of the mental and physical limitations, and in expanding them. What are some of the mindset strategies that you teach your clients that you feel have been or have played a big part in their achievement and success?
I'd say the first thing is around working around your values and core beliefs. I really think that is, and just talking from personal experience, that the times when things have gone wrong in my life, and the times when things don't work out, there might be various external and environmental factors that can contribute to those, but 9 times out of 10, you've stepped outside of your value system. So I think if you can get very, very clear on your value system and as to why you're doing something and where that fits in your world, then you've got a lot better chance, because succeeding on an expedition isn't just about what's actually happening on the mountain. It's the whole process that gets you to the mountain. And if your value system isn't solid, and you're say you're going on a let's pick for somebody, a listener at home who is just doing their first bucket list trip. They're going to Everest Basecamp or to Kilimanjaro or something like that. It is the why that they're doing it, which is the thing that's going to get them up in the morning when it's dark, it's cold, they've got a bit of a cold, it's pissing down with rain, and they just want to roll over, hit the snooze button again. if they're clear on their values and their why, they're going to get up. If they're not, they'll roll over, hit the snooze button. So that's one of the things. And the other is the practice of practice. So it's just getting the reps in, just doing the work. And you can practice, not necessarily just by doing the exercise side, but the practice of practice in other areas. So, I encourage people to do a whole number of things, journaling, meditation, juggling, and if they can, not for everybody, but hand balancing or handstand practice as well. Because with those last two, well, not with those last two, with all four of them, they're not something that you can get right. You've got to a point, okay, you've got it, you've nailed it, that's it. They're all practices that can be built on, and they have to be practiced regularly, and if you can do those consistently, you'll start finding that you're able to be more consistent in other areas of your life as well. So we do stuff like that.
I love that. And it got me thinking because, even myself personally, I got into ultramarathon running just before sort of COVID, the year before COVID. And I've had quite a lot of runs booked and quite a lot of runs cancelled or rescheduled. I'm just sort of, on the computer, fast forwarding to the next year. And, it has been challenging and I've had to sort of reassess and reset in the way that I approach this. And I'm really interested in your advice around this because I think there are the people in the bucket sort of like me that have been training for things and they're rescheduled and cancelled. Or there are people that have sort of, maybe wanting to plan their first goal or whatever it is, but putting it off during COVID. Is there any advice that you have or even have seen within, your clients in how to still achieve things and still, progress and expand your potential in a time like this where things are very different?
Yeah, look, definitely. I think what people need to do is just is reset and reevaluate. So I have this whole process when we're goal setting with people, when we're creating a vision. So I call it X marks a spot. So I want you to imagine that you have a treasure map, okay? And like any old-fashioned map, there's hardly any details on it at all. And you've put your big red X marks a spot, and that might be your event or whatever. Now, as we fill in that treasure map, like with the features and contour lines and stuff like that. Now, the features and the contour lines, they're all the skills and the abilities that are needed to get there. So skills as in, okay, trail running, do I need to become better at downhill running? Because people don't realize downhill trail running or the downhill component of trail running is a skill that needs to be practiced and worked on. Then physical ability. So skills and abilities are slightly different. So abilities, physical ability, what do I need to be to do this? Where do I need to be? As far as my physical abilities, do I need to be stronger? Do I need to be faster? Do I need to have a larger aerobic capacity? How good's my engine? And generally pull that all together. And then we start talking about resilient. How resilient am I? How robust am I as an athlete? And so as you start filling that actually starts filling in the contours and the features of your map, okay? Now, any map that you have, that's the X is where you're going to go, that you've got the contours and the features. And what a map, there's a term in, if you're familiar with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, they have a saying in that the map is not the territory, okay? So the map is not exactly what's out there. It's a representation of what's out there. And what you can't see on the map are things like the rockfall that happened, the logs that came down over the path during a rainstorm, the flooding, the stuff like that you can only see in the territory. Now, COVID, this isn't just a rock fall. This is a bloody earthquake that's happening to ours. But it means that if we've still got X marks a spot and we've still got all these features here, we just need to find another route. Okay, so we just look at it. Okay, well, what can I do? And it gets back to this whole thing: control the things that work on the things that you can control, and forget about the things that you can't. There's a load of stuff that we can't control, and I do find it funny. I do have there's quite a few people, and some of them novices, as you'd expect, but I'm surprised at the amount of people who are actually reasonably experienced in various adventure fields who are actually really struggling with the limitations of COVID. They're having a meltdown because they can't do the things that they need to do. Now, look, I know they might have financial pressures though. If they're in the adventure industry and it's their livelihood, well, there's a hell of a lot of pressure there. But I still believe that even with that, here you're talking to somebody who's just lost their business. I've just lost my gym because of COVID, direct result of. And okay, well, I'm really looking at. I wasn't here just to have a gym. I'm here to help people get the most out of their lives using physical, mental challenge and adventure. So what are the things that I can do? How can I work towards it? So very convoluted way, but let's get back onto your trail runner training for the cancelled event. It's literally, if you know about programming, well, in programming, we have various aspects to our program. When we program, we have a preparatory phase at the beginning. We then have our base phase. We then have what I call a climb phase. Other people call it a peak phase. We then have a taper, and we then have the event, okay? So you just pull back and you go back to your base phase and you work your base phase, okay? The base phase is actually, we're going to get into the technicalities of aerobic engines here, but basically when we are building our aerobic capacity and when we are building our engine as an athlete, the vast majority of that is done during the base phase. Okay, so this isn't doing all the fancy stuff and the hill sprints and working on our metabolic system. So we've got two very different engines. We've got a metabolic engine and we've got our aerobic engine. Now, the aerobic engine is the one that takes the longest to build. So if your event has been cancelled, fantastic, that's brilliant. You've got more time to build your engine. The reason why Kilian Jornet is the amazing athlete that he is that his mum and dad started him training and him doing big, long hikes and runs from a very early age. And this is the advantage that he's got over every single other athlete because they all started in their teens and in their 20s. He started as a kid. He's got like 10 years on everybody. He's always going to be 10 years ahead of everybody. And we know that it can take a minimum of 2 seasons to maximize our aerobic capacity. Now, most people, because we've all got, or so many people have got exercise ADD, that they don't want to give it 2 years to spend time doing lots of long and slow. They just want to get into the cool stuff, and they want to book another event, and they want to book this event and that event, and they have all these races with hardly any time to recover in between. Now they're being forced to recover, hopefully, as long as they've just not taken themselves off and are smashing themselves so they can lie in a pool heaving sweat somewhere, which isn't actually achieving what they want to or what they need to.
Yeah,
sorry, I was off on a rant there.
No, I find it very interesting because I think it has been one of those times where, people are, like you suggested, people are sort of so busy sort of doing one event and then booking the another, and they're just sort of on this flow. And, I feel like COVID's been so beautiful for them because I know in my own experience having to slow down and reset has been extremely amazing for me. But I've been fortunate enough to have, the mindset right for that to sort of happen that way. I think there are some people out there that obviously, I do see it in ultra marathon running. It's an outlet. It's a form of escapism. And when they no longer have this form of outlet, that's when, people turn to drugs and alcohol and all these other things that maybe they wouldn't normally do, not in the constraints of COVID. So, I think like you're suggesting, it's so important to keep that sort of that goal in the forefront of your head and just adapt the process, but still be moving in the right direction.
Yes, still move there. And you can do things, you can cheat yourself a little bit as well. So I know plenty of people who are actually on events that have been cancelled, actually, as long as it's within the right state or whatever, are actually going and then running the course. A bunch of them are going and running the course on that date themselves. And so they're giving themselves their own little event. The important thing there, though, is that if we're trying to, it's my belief that a lot of people run way too many events, and they run them. It's not the running of the events; it's the fact that they're running every single one as an A race. And it should be. I have this whole thing about A, B, and C class races, and the C class ones, we should run it as if it's part of our training. We don't taper to go into it. We don't try and get our best time. We just do it for the community. We do it to be on the course. We do it to test out our current level of fitness, etc. Just do more of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So, Joe, thank you so much for this wonderful podcast. It was such a pleasure to get to know you and your background more. And, I'm a little biased, but I am excited for what Joe's Basecamp is going to evolve into. I feel like we have a similar headspace, very grateful for the opportunity. And I know that you're going to do amazing things for incredible and extraordinary people. So I really honor you for that.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure being here. It's been great. Great interview.
Good. Oh, thank you, Joe. I would love to ask you on a final note, Joe, what does it mean to you to be human?
What does it mean to me to be human? To be human, it's to share experiences and to be able to help one another, and if I can, it's using the tools that you have as an individual to do your best for all of those around you. Mine happened to be around coaching and around my knowledge of a combination of physical exercise and wilderness adventure sports. If I can use those to help people be better people and to help people get the most out of their life, then I've done. I'm doing okay. I really am here to help people lead a fitter, a more fulfilled, more engaged, and more passionate and adventurous life. For other people, that it's the same thing. It's whatever tools that they've been blessed with, that they've developed. We want to use it to help each other. Life's not a solo sport. We might be involved in solo sports, but life isn't a solo sport. It's a team sport. And if we can actually spend more time with each other and helping each other, I think the world's going to be a lot better place.